Police history and organizations. The most difficult tasks for any civilized people to accomplish are securing safety, ensuring and promoting health, providing education, gathering and preparing foods, building dwellings, and providing for human security. Let's talk about criminal behavior. There are two different types of behavior which we'll focus on, one being crimes and the other being deviants. Know that not all crimes are deviant and not all deviants are crimes. Crimes that are deviants are characteristics demonstrated by humanity since the beginning of time. Early man would sacrifice their firstborn son to eliminate disease, bad weather, crime, attack from foreign warriors, or either for other different types of superstition.
It's the first step in determining if this child was sacrificed. One of the greatest tales of sacrifice comes from the biblical story of Abraham and Isaac. The book of Genesis tells us that Abraham is God's most loyal follower. In return for his faith, God promises to make Abraham the father of many nations. But when God demands Abraham kill his son, Isaac, it goes against all his spiritual beliefs. Abraham faces an impossible choice. He must sacrifice his beloved son or defy his God. Our possible sacrificial child comes from some of the earliest ancient settlements in the Holy Land of Abraham, at a place called Fetzael. 6,000 years ago, this land was known as Canaan. According to biblical tradition, at the time Canaanites were living here, their tribes paid tributes to many gods with offerings of goats, sheep, and grain, and sometimes children.
Let's talk about criminal justice and religion. Not until the time of Abraham, approximately 6,000 years ago, the Jewish religion was created. Some believe this early religion was created to protect women and children from sacrifice, rape, murder, pillaging, incest, or even being eaten by food.
Do you go to the shops?
Yeah, I just picked up a couple of things I thought.
You know we're on a budget.
It was just a few things I thought that we needed.
Doesn't look like a couple of bloody things to me. Looks like it did a whole bloody shop. You're blowing the budget. How are we going to get ahead, Anna, if you just keep spending and spending? Huh? How are you going to spend it now?
All right.
There you go, boys.
Next round's on me, boys.
Yeah, it is.
I'll believe it when I see it.
When's the last time you bought around?
Mate, I don't want to peak too early, okay? You got to pace yourself.
I don't want to peak
I'll
at
get
all.
around to it.
Hopeless woman.
Everything okay?
What does she think I'm made of money or something?
What's wrong?
Oh, she wants money for petrol now. How bloody hopeless. I only just cut up her credit card too.
Mate, pull your head in.
1 in 3 women are affected by domestic violence in Australia. It's time to make it none in 3. Domestic violence isn't just about physical assault. Speak up against all forms of domestic violence. All men can make a difference.
The Jewish religion is considered one of the first laws to protect women and children, similar today to our domestic violence laws. The Sabbath, the beginning of the moral and ethical law enforcement. So, our criminal justice system is based on religion. Think about the Garden of Eden, which would be found in the Old Testament. In the Garden of Eden, those that lived in the Garden of Eden, they were limitations as to what they were allowed to do. So there were placed limitations as to what one would be allowed to do while in the Garden of Eden. Remember, there are 2 types of law. There's mala in se.
Malam in se. Noun. 1. Literally, wrong in itself. 2. Law, The Latin phrase used in law to refer to crimes that are illegal from the nature of crime, that is, inherently evil without any fact of its being noticed or punished, as opposed to malum prohibitum, used to develop common law crimes.
And there's mala prohibita. Mala in se is God's law, while mala prohibita is man's law. So mala in se is considered to be a universal law where, regardless where you are, the laws are the same, as opposed to mala prohibita.
Well, mala prohibita is a similar concept. It basically means that something is wrong because it goes against the law. Let's examine this idea a little further. Mala prohibita is a Latin phrase which means wrong because it is prohibited. In criminal law, the term mala prohibita applies in instances where something is made criminal by a criminal statute. Generally, crimes that are mala prohibita do not harm people or property. They are typically statutes which apply to minor crimes. Moreover, mala prohibita crimes do not usually require intent. There are a variety of crimes that can be classified as mala prohibita. For instance, public intoxication constitutes a mala prohibita crime. Another crime is gambling in states where it is prohibited. Other crimes include speeding and tax evasion. All of these crimes do not require that the person who committed them had the intent to do so. Rather, just the fact that the person committed the act makes them guilty of the crime.
From jurisdiction or area to area, the laws will change based on what man has made. So, how did our laws come about? Well, there was this guy called Moses, and for now let's refer to him as Moses 1.
Moses, I give to you the way to live. I give to you my 10 commandments. Remember them. Teach them. Teach them for the rest of time. I am the Lord your God. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not worship false gods. You shall never take my name in vain. You shall keep the Sabbath day holy. Honor your father and your mother. You shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not lie. You shall never want what belongs to others.
Thank you, God. Thank you.
Moses, your face. You've been touched by God.
The 10 laws of Moses, supplements of God's law. And there were consequences if one violated God's law, again meaning mala in se. If one would violate God's law, they'd have to pay a fine, the loss of group or private privileges for various times. They could be put to death or they could be banished. If we think of our criminal justice system today, if one engages in a statutory crime or offense, they have to pay a fine.
You're in luck. I found exact change
Y'all can mail me a receipt too. Just mail me the receipt.
They also can lose group privileges, meaning they go to jail or prison for a certain amount of time. If it's a capital crime, they can be put to death.
Yes, okay. I got just that. We're just getting the prisoner installed then, sir. Okay, we're just to get up on the very now. Get up there. Sit down here. Sit up there.
You have been sentenced to death for the murder of Howard Charles on May the 15th, 2003. I would like to give you the opportunity to make a statement before we proceed with your sentence.
I hope that the family of Mr. Charles is able to move on after my passing. I'm truly very sorry for what I've done. That's important. Yes, sir. Okay. The governor's getting the authorization to proceed with the execution. Search 3A saying 60 milliliters. I'm close, ready to swap. Why don't you take about 5 minutes for that to kick in? Okay. Syringe 4A, macaronium bromide, 50 milligrams. Syringe 5A, macaronium bromide, 50 milligrams. Paralyzed. Syringe 6A saline, 60 milliliters. His eyes are open. Last time. No, just keep going, keep going. Go. Wait. Talk to me, Mike. He should be unconscious and paralyzed. Right, come on, let's go. 7A. Come on, guys, keep together. Okay, 8A, go in. Okay, go. Syringe 7A, potassium chloride, 120 ml equivalent. What's going on? It's all right, Joe. It's all right. What about the saline? Should be unconscious. What's going on, Mike? Shit. Is it a tissue? Governor? Joe. Reach up. Try to breathe for me. Come on, come on.
And banished, depending on your citizenship status, you can be banned. Back in the day, the United States or the colonies and France, their criminals, they would put on a ship and they would send them to Australia. So some today say Australia is a country that was made of illegals. In the beginning of time, again, there were two types of groups. There were in-groups and out-groups. In-groups were pretty much people that lived in the ghetto. Now, when I say ghetto, I'm not referring to ghetto as a negative place as we would refer to a ghetto today, but a ghetto, think of it as a great gated community where it was a very, very nice place to live. So in these in-groups, the people were considered to be territorial, where they would stay within those ghettos, stay within this particular area, and they would learn the customs. They would be assigned jobs, usually within the ghetto, the traditional, the territorial individuals that were in the ghetto. The strongest and the most reliable person would be assigned the task of being the police officer. Then you had people that weren't territorial. They were considered to be wanderers. Some people would refer to them as gypsies, but that's really not politically correct. So the term either would be wanderers or travelers. So, but people that were in the ghetto that were territorial, if they stayed within a particular area, there was ritual developments, meaning property would be assigned to them, particular areas where they are able to live, things they're able to do. Some people will be assigned the task of building houses, preparing food, family assignments. There's this thing that you may have learned about in your American government class called the social contract. This social contract is a virtual contract that individuals sign that live within a particular area. It's not a real contract where you actually, put pen to paper, but it's a social contract where you agree that because you're going to live in a particular area, that you're going to subscribe to these social norms. Well, back in the day, and I keep saying back in the day, when was back in the day? Well, we'll get to that. So back in the day, these social contracts were considered to be social mores or mores. Mores eventually turned into laws. So dominant groups that lived within a particular area, they would develop laws. They would grow up, so their morals would turn into mores, and those mores would turn into laws. And then again, if the law is made by man, it's considered to be mala prohibita.
For as long as they have existed, men's restrooms have prided themselves on being far superior to women's facilities due to their faster transaction processing time. The functioning of a restroom is directly dependent on the efficiency of the men using it. Waste no time. This is vital. Walk in, do your business, wash your hands, walk out. Never make eye contact. This could be seen as a proposition and could result in a severe beating or unwanted sexual encounter. Resist at all costs the temptation to let your gaze wander to any part of the body of a fellow occupant, whether their nether regions are of genuine interest to you or not. When you enter the restroom, always select the urinal that is as far away as possible from men who are using other urinals. Here are some illustrations of various urinal situations and the proper course of action for each. Situation number 1. All urinals are empty. Correct action. Take the urinal on either edge. This allows others to most effectively comply with the rules that are to follow. Situation number 2. One urinal is taken. Correct action. The urinal on the right is the optimum choice here. This minimizes the chance of any contact whatsoever with the other man in the bathroom. Situation number 3. 2 urinals are taken. Correct action. The middle urinal, which is equidistant from the other 2 occupants. Situation number 4. 3 urinals are taken. Correct action. No urinal is acceptable. The loo has now reached critical mass. Leave and come back later, or use a stall. Under no circumstances should two adjacent urinals be in use at the same time.
Make sure you know the difference between mala prohibita and mala in se. The word police is derived from the Latin word meaning politica, politica meaning civil administrator. So a lot of different countries and territories had different words for police. Politica, Greek word, was polis, P-O-L-I-S, city or system of organized civil enforcement. Police French, which is called power of the people. You had different types of acts. You had the Act of the English Parliament in 1892, and then Sir Robert Peel, which was the title for, which came about with the title for police. Remember, Sir Robert Peel is considered to be one of the founders of law enforcement. Sir Robert Peel was the leader of the Metropolitan Police Department. He created it, and you'll read more about that in your chapter. So I talked about this delegation of power for those that were territorial. So those territorial leaders, they were either considered to be kings, pharaohs, emperors, and they would pass down their power or their leadership from to family descendants, or they would lose their power by military takeover, where one tribe or one ghetto would conquer the other tribe and almost put them into slavery, but not slavery as we know it here in the United States, because the individual, if their tribe was conquered and they were taken into slavery, they eventually could progress within that particular new ghetto or tribe to be the leader of that tribe.
Leonidas, my compliments and congratulations. You surely have turned calamity into victory, and despite your insufferable arrogance, the God King has come to admire Spartan valor and fighting skill.
Leonidas, use your reason. Think of your men. I beg you.
Listen to your fellow Greek. He can attest to the Divine One's generosity. Despite your several insults, despite your horrid blasphemies, the Lord of Hosts is prepared to forgive all, and more. Toward your service, you fight for your land. Keep them. You fight for Sparta. She will be wealthier and more powerful than ever before. You fight for your kingship. You will be proclaimed warlord of all Greece, answerable only to the one true master of the world. Leonidas, your victory will be complete if you but lay down your arms and kneel.
His helmet is stifling. His shield is heavy.
Your spear. You there, Ethiotis. May you live forever. Leonidas, your spear.
So let's talk about early written laws. You probably know about Hammurabi's Code, which was used in Babylonian times.
Hammurabi's Code, Babylonian Law and Order. When Hammurabi came to power in Babylonia around 1790, he conquered neighboring kingdoms in the region including the Assyrians. By the end of his military campaign, his kingdom included approximately 24 cities, making it an extremely large empire for its time. Hammurabi appointed governors, judges, tax collectors, and soldiers to keep tight control of the empire. Perhaps the one thing he is most remembered for was the 282 laws known as the Code of Hammurabi. The code was inscribed on an 8-foot stone slab of basalt. Hammurabi's words, "I have brought justice to all my subjects," were carved into the stone. With a sculptural relief of Hammurabi standing in front of the god delivering the laws to him. The laws describe the punishment for crimes, and the process for retribution, including harsh penalties. The expression "an eye for an eye" is derived from the law that read, "If man put out the eye of another man, his eye shall be put out." In other words, the person committing a crime will have the same crime inflicted as a punishment. The laws provide information about Babylonian society. They covered religion, irrigation, and military service. Others dealt with trade and slavery. From a modern perspective, there are problems with some of these laws. The laws varied according to a person's position in society. For example, injuring a rich man brought a greater penalty than injuring a poor man. Not everyone was treated the same, especially slaves. It is not the earliest set of laws, but it was preserved in stone. Thus the expression, "It's not written in stone." Once something is carved into it, it's difficult to erase or change. The long-term effect of Hammurabi's code established guidelines for ruling his empire for over 40 years.
I encourage you to look at the Pentateuch. The Pentateuch is the guide to civilized mankind, which is the first 3 books of the Old Testament. Moses Maimonides, we'll refer to Moses Maimonides as Moses II. Moses Maimonides added 365 additional laws to the laws that Moses I received from God. The Anglo-Saxons in England, they had their system of written laws. You had the Kanga, the earliest document of law in China. You have the Qingwu, you have the Code of Manu, M-A-N-U, which is from India.
Laws of Manu. What is that? Well, first of all, the Laws of Manu are the earliest extant codification of the sacred laws of Dharma, and was written by anonymous compilers between the 1st century BCE and the 2nd or 3rd century CE. As you can tell from the name, this goes under the category of law. In Hindu mythology, Manu was a primeval human being, the father of humanity and his first king. He is also the first educator of the Dharma, the principle of the cosmic order. Now here, Dharma is very important because Dharma is basically the foundation of Hinduism. It sparked innumerable rituals including faith, worship, and social duty. So what happened during this time? The Mauryan Empire fell at 184 BCE, and a series of foreign rule started. First came the Greco-Bactrians, then the Shakas, then the Kushans. Despite all of this political fragmentation, economy, intellect, and culture still flourished. In fact, India was at the heart of international land and sea trade routes that linked China, Southeast Asia, Central Asia, the Middle East, East Africa, and the lands of the Mediterranean. Also, this period of India was called the classical period of great literary and artistic productivity. Previously, we have mentioned the Dharma and its importance as the foundation of Hinduism. The Laws of Manu is also largely based on Dharma, so we can reasonably infer that this codification was written for the followers of the Hindu. It is quite the vast majority of the population in India at this point, because the population is insisted in following Hinduism despite the ruler's promotion of Buddhism. The compilers of this document are anonymous, but we can deduce that they had some religious affiliation or power to have written such sacred codification, because it obviously gives almost unlimited power to the priests or Brahmins. In fact, another possible candidate for the authors might be the Aryans, because the caste system was the result of their effort to separate themselves from the natives they have conquered. So why did they even write this document? Well, this is really a brief codification of 2,500 years of Indian culture, the social history, and religious thought. This is part of the reason why this seems so full of contradictions when you see it now, but they did not at the time. The purpose of this codification was also to justify the Brahmins' power through laws and religion, and to substantiate their authority and make official. And like mentioned before, the Aryans created the caste system to discriminate those who look different than themselves. A similar and more recent comparison would be the American slave system. The significance of this document lies in its representation of ancient India's culture and its intense dedication to religion. Also, it seems true, at least until now, that the codification is universal and timeless, quote-unquote. Also, the caste system is very unique to India because there was close to no fluency between the classes and it is predetermined before their birth. Now take a moment to think if any of this sounds familiar. If it is, you probably read a similar document on law. For example, there is a Justinian Corpus Juris Civilis written by Emperor Justinian of the Byzantine Empire. First, to compare the historical context, they both had long-lasting effects, longer than empires, and was very influential to other political systems. They also had very large audiences, mostly concerning every follower of the king or the government. The codifications were both written by people of high position, and its purpose was also similar because they attempted to bring the people together as one. They both were important in the sense that they brought everyone together and clarified important aspects of a society, just like the Corpus Juris Civilis set clear standards for laws and broadly set social duties, like the laws of Manu. Now, to contrast the document's historical context and purpose, the laws of Manu focused on the social structure, while the Corpus Juris Civilis primarily focused on legal codes. Also, their points of view were different because Emperor Justinian tried to set a rather fair law, whereas the priests of India gave themselves a huge advantage. Next, the difference of their audience is the presence of religion, but it really doesn't change the fact that they're still the vast majority. Lastly, the only difference in their importance is that the laws of Manu gave a much larger effect on social structure, while the Corpus Juris Civilis barely touched based on it.
And then again, Hammurabi's Code, the Roman Digest, and the Magna Carta are all early written documents that talk about the law. So, again, let's talk a little bit more about criminal justice system in this country as well as other countries and religion. When an individual is arrested here in the United States, more likely than not, they're going to be held on bail.
So how does bail actually work? And is it an unfair system? Well, when you get arrested, you're usually given the option of returning home to await your trial. However, in order to make sure you actually come back, the courts require you to give up a refundable deposit. This deposit is known as bail. Some people who are considered flight risks or dangerous to society are not given the opportunity to post bail. If you do come back to court, the money is then refunded to you. If you don't, you forfeit the money and a warrant can be issued for your arrest. Giving suspects freedom until their trial is a major aspect of the legal concept innocent until proven guilty. However, if you are unable to afford your bail, you stay imprisoned until your trial.
Bail, another word for bail, is a surety, meaning that a person has to put up either property or money to ensure that when the court tells them to appear for adjudication, that they will appear. If the person does not put up the money, then they have to stay in jail until they have their trial. More likely than not, here within the United States, an individual has to put up 10% of the total bail. Well, that relates back to the religion, which is a tithing system. Think about it. If you go to church, you're supposed to give a certain percentage of your gross income to that religious organization, and that is called the tithing. The percentage that you're supposed to give is 10%.
Commonly understood that we're supposed to tithe 10% of our income and give it to the church. Now, is that 10% of the gross or 10% of the net? Where is this command in the Bible that talks about tithing anyway? The answer might surprise you when we understand the text.
Good
Hebrews 7:4-6 records that Abraham gave a tenth of the spoils from war back to the Lord. By his example, the Levite priests were to collect from the Israelites a tithe, or 10%, to support their ministry. It's debated as to whether or not this implies we should be giving 10% of our income to the church. Another viewpoint says that was only a practice in the Old Testament.
First 10% goes to God. Now, I know the arguments. Well, tithing is Old Testament law. If you're here tonight, you're that person, I'm glad you're here. Two things about you that tells me. Number one, you're stupid. Number two, you don't read your Bible.
Now, back in the day, I talked about the wanderers, and I talked about the territorial individuals. Individuals that were territorial, they would take 10 families in a town, and those 10 families would be considered a ton, a T-U-N. So a ton equals a tithing, which equals 10 families. Those 10 families, or the ton, would then elect one individual to be their leader. The individual that was elected to be their leader was called a tithing man. So a tithing man is an elected leader. 10 tithings, again, which is 10 families, equals 100. 10 tithings equal 100. And that 100 is going to be the reeve. The reeve, the person that's in charge of those 100, is called the reeve. And that reeve has judicial power, similar to police power. So you had a tithing man and you had the reeve. There's a term called jurisdiction. Jurisdiction is defined as a political defined geographical area. So different areas of the country, different areas of the county are sectioned off into different areas. So back in the day, there were these things called shires. Shire is equivalent to a county today. Think of Kings Shire, Dutchess Shire, Nassau Shire. And the leader of the shire was called a shire reeve. The word shire reeve comes, now we call that person the sheriff, S-H-E-R-I-F-F. So the shire reeve comes from two words, meaning the shire reeve, which means sheriff. And then underneath the sheriff, you had a tithing man and you had a undersheriff. So what was the sheriff's responsibility? To enforce the law, to maintain order, and to maintain community peace. Also, what the shire reeve's responsibility was to collect the king's taxes for when the colonists broke away from the crown and they wanted to go on their own way. The king said, yeah, you can do that, but you still have to pay my taxes. So he would send the reeve out to the shires to collect his money, and then we have the word shire reeves. Again, early communities, everyone had to participate in securing the safety of their fellow citizens. So if you saw that the Smith's farm was on fire, you would have to yell it, meaning like hue and cry. It's kind of like in class I say, if you see something, say something, and you see those signs all around the city, if you see something, say something.
The colonists were warned by Paul Revere that the British were coming, and Samuel Adams and John Hancock escaped. The next day, the colonial militiamen assembled at Lexington and faced the much bigger British force.
Well, think about hue and cry, meaning if you see something, you have to say something, and that's pretty much equivalent to what we have in internal affairs today in law enforcement and policing. Capital punishment, back in the day, there was capital punishment where they would put people to death, but it would be based on not scientific evidence, but they had these things called trial by ordeal. Trial by ordeal would mean something like if you were a man and you were accused of stealing a horse, they would tie you together. They would tie you up in ropes, put rocks in your pocket, and they would throw you into a pond or a lake. If you sank to the bottom of the lake and you stayed down there for 1 minute, that meant you were innocent, so then they would go into the lake, bring you out, and on your way you would go. If you would float to the top, that would be an indication that you were guilty, and then you would be stoned to death, trial by ordeal. In that same time frame, women were considered not to have mens reis. If you're not sure what mens reis and actus reis is, refer to your Intro to Criminal Justice text. So women were not considered to have mens reis. So if a female committed a crime, what would normally be a crime if committed by a man, it was either that they were deviant, meaning they're not following the instructions of the man, because women were considered to be property, or they were witches. witches. So the man would nominate the female, saying that, I told her when I come home I wanted my food on the table, and she didn't do it. So they go out to the town square, they would take the female, they would tie her up, put stones in her pocket. If she, then they would throw her into the pond or the lake. If she sank to the bottom, that meant that she was deviant, and she agreed she deserved to die. However, if she should float to the top, that meant she was a witch. So they would take her out of the water, and then they would stone her to death. So either way, the female would be put to death or through capital punishment. Other trials by ordeals for men would be they would have them walk across hot coals, pick up hot plates and hot rocks, and depending on if their skin burned or if calluses came about, that would be an indication of being guilty or being innocent. Every male over the age of 13 in the Anglo-Saxon system, or the watch and ward system, had to patrol the community. Remember, they had to patrol their ghetto, their territory they were living in. So they had the watch and the ward. The watch is the night guard, and the ward is the day guard. So watch and ward. Then you have these things called beat systems today. Beat systems are small permanent posts where police officers stand. You have used to have bounty hunters. Remember, bounty hunters have no law enforcement authority. They are just citizens like you and I. The first organized groups of law enforcement, what we consider to be law enforcement today, was the Ku Klux Klan. Your text does not refer to them as Ku Klux Klan. They refer to them as the Slave Patrol. And the Slave Patrol, their job was to control slaves and to support the Southern economy system of slavery. Individuals had to give mutual pledges, like King Alfred required people to pledge their allegiance to him, similar to what we do when we pledge our allegiance to the flag. Then you had the Pendleton Act that your text is going to talk about. The Pendleton Act came about in 1883, which was dealing with civil service systems. And a lot of other things came about, as we trace law enforcement. Military bodyguards, the first police in Rome. They have the Rodney King beaten.
Ended early Sunday morning with the motorist, a black male, being brutally beaten and kicked by Los Angeles police officers. A beating that continued even as the man appeared to offer no resistance.
All of a sudden, police brutality had a human face, and it was being battered by Los Angeles cops on a neighborhood street in the San Fernando Valley. The face belonged to Rodney King, a 25-year-old high school dropout with a criminal record. He had been convicted of second-degree robbery, and he was out on parole.
The motorist was apparently shot by a taser gun, which is used to electrically shock a suspect into submission. But police also stomped on the man's head and repeatedly kicked him before both his wrists and ankles were bound.
All of it happened right over here.
Among the eyewitnesses at the scene, there was disagreement over what and who had started.
One guy in particular that just hit him and hit him and hit him and hit him, and he just wouldn't stop.
The cops said they suspected King was high on drugs, that he was belligerent and resisting arrest. King said they never let up.
But they continued to hound on me and beat on me, all over my body. They beat where it hurt, in my ankles. They beat my whole body where it hurt. It hurt real bad because it was hit with a stick. And the same with my face, my jaw. I was scared. I was scared for my life.
Little is known about early policing. Modern policing styles didn't occur until about the 14th century in France and the 19th century in England. So if we say that modern styles of policing didn't occur until the 14th century in France and not until the 19th century in England, that would tell us that Sir Robert Peel wasn't the first person to put together policing, but he got the credit for that. What else should we talk about before I stop? I think that's about it. Make sure you keep up with your reading. If you have any questions, contact me.